And there might be an interim period where you're going to feel like there is nothing you can trust. There is nothing that seems real. Everything is uncertain. Everything is up for questioning. I have gone through that period myself. It took me probably 10, 15 years to fully work through it. I'm not saying it will take that long for you. It's an individual matter. But you should expect that you will have to go through a period where you have to question your most basic assumptions about life. Everything that has so far given you a sense of security will have to be questioned so that you can reach beyond this state of consciousness that is dominated by these two dualistic extremes. You see, so far you might have thought that knowing truth is a matter of finding out what is truth as opposed to what is error. What I'm telling you is that both truth and error are ultimately wrong because they are defined in relation to each other. And you have to be willing to transcend that level of consciousness that defines truth in opposition to error. When you go to God's reality, you experience something that is beyond these dualistic extremes. God cannot be forced into a dualistic thought system, the real God, because God is beyond the human consciousness. Now, if you think about this, there is a very important lesson here that we can learn from the Old Testament. You've heard about the 10 Commandments. The first two commandments that Moses received on the mountain was, number 1, thou shalt have no other gods before me. And number 2, thou shalt not take unto thyself any graven image. Now the first one means that if you want to experience the real God, you have to realize that God is transcendent, God is infinite, God is beyond any man-made concept or image. And therefore you have to be willing to abandon all of the graven images that people have created. I'm not here talking about an idol carved in stone or a golden calf. I'm talking about mental images of God. And what you have to realize is that if you were brought up in a Christian tradition, for example, you have been brought up with a mental image of God, the theistic image as God being the remote being up in the sky, the father figure up in the sky. But what I'm telling you is that if you want to experience God's presence, you have to go beyond that image, because God, the real God, is not like that. God is not like the God that is described in the Old Testament. God is actually like the God that Jesus described when he said, the kingdom of God is within you. Which means that God and God's kingdom is a state of consciousness. I argue that in another series of discourses on a revolutionary look at Jesus, where I say that Jesus actually came to help us rise above the duality consciousness and attain the Christ consciousness where we experience God's reality. Now, here comes the trick. When you do begin to have these glimpses, these mystical experiences of God's reality, God's presence, God's being, what will start happening is that you will have something that most people do not have today. You will have a direct experience of something that is absolutely and undeniably real. And it will be a very stark contrast to the level of consciousness that I've talked about, the dualistic level of consciousness, where you can argue for or against anything. You see, your ego wants to feel secure, and it feels secure when it can argue that it is right no matter what. And as long as you are trapped in this dualistic state of consciousness, the ego can always argue and reason that it's right. But once you, the real you, begins to have these experiences of something beyond duality, your ego can no longer trap you in this dualistic reasoning, because now you will know that something is real. but it will also disturb you. It will disturb your sense of security, your sense of equilibrium, even your sense of who you are. You are going to sense that there is more to you than the human being that you were brought up to see yourself as. There is a deeper reality to your own personal being. You are more than a human being. But as I said, in the beginning, that can be almost disturbing, because you begin to doubt everything that you were brought up to believe. You begin to question everything you were brought up to believe. And then all of a sudden you start feeling, well, if this was wrong, and if that was wrong, and if this is not real, what is real? What can I trust? Who am I really? And this can be an unsettling period, but as I said, if you will continue seeking the direct experience, you can work through that period. And then you begin to build a sense of discernment, which is what Jesus talked about when he talked about the key of knowledge, where you have the ability to know what is real and what is unreal. And when you get to that point, you will begin to build a much deeper sense of who you are, not as a human being, but as a spiritual being who is simply temporarily expressing yourself through this human body and even the human mind and brain. You are more than the body, you are more than the brain, you are more than the outer mind. And when you begin to realize that, you will begin to build a new sense of identity that is beyond the human sense of identity. It is beyond this world. You have Jesus' parable where he talked about those who built their house on sand versus those who built their house on solid ground. And what you were brought up with was a sense of identity that was built on sand as a symbol for the duality consciousness, where your sense of identity is built on this argument that really has no connection to a deeper reality. And therefore your sense of identity can be threatened. See, for example, how some religious people have suddenly become disgruntled with their religion. They come to doubt their religion, and they don't know who they are anymore. Their sense of identity is threatened. At the same time, you have had people who were atheists or materialists and who have had a religious conversion experience that has also threatened their sense of identity. What I'm talking about is something that goes beyond that, where you find a deeper sense of who you are. And that deeper sense of who you are will allow you to build what, in my experience, is the most precious state of mind that you can have as a human being. A state of mind where you are at peace. You are at peace with yourself. You are at peace with the world. And you are at peace with God. Because you know who you are. You know who God is, and you know how you fit into the greater scheme of God's creation. That is a state of peace, and it's a state of spiritual freedom. If you want it, let's take a look at how you might achieve it.